constraint. Now I'm going to rewrite my objective function below my constraints, just like it said up there. So I have negative 7x1, line everything up, minus x2, okay? There's no s's in your objective function, but there is a plus z way out here at the end, and you're going to keep that an equal sign, and then that one's equal to 0. Now when you go to set up your tableau here, okay, so what's going to happen, I'm going to write underneath the next one, so just kind of keep writing down. I'm going to write underneath, is that you're going to create your bracket, and you need to label each column. So each of these is its own column. X1, X2, S1, S2 is its own column, and Z is its own column. So I have X1, I have X2, and then I have S1, S2, and then I have Z, and then goes my vertical line, and then goes my constants, and then that's going to be the end of my bracket. So now each equation then is a row. And remember, you're only putting in the numbers here. So I have 4, 2, 1 S1, 0 S2, 0 Z, and then 5 for that first row. In the second row I have 1 X1, 2 X2, no S1s, I do have 1 S2, I have no Z's, and then 4 for that second row. And in that third row, now you're going to have negative 7 for X1, negative 1 for X2. Your objective function has no S's, it has 1 Z, and then you're going to have a 0 for that constant. Right? And then you just need to draw a line above your objective function. And I'm just going to write here, I'm just going to write OBJ FN. So I remind myself that that's my objective function. And that's how you're going to create your simplex tableau. Right? We are going to do part B here. So now we're going to work on B. Okay, so it's set up kind of the same way. It's talking about our 3 constraints in the middle, and it has our Z. Okay, so I need to add a S1 to that first constraint, an S2 to my second constraint, and an S3 to that third constraint. So I'm just going to rewrite it over here, right to the side. So it's going to be X1 plus X2 plus S1. I'm going to change it to an equal sign and then 10. Okay. And then I'm going to change the second one. It's going to be 5x1 plus 2x2. Remember, there's no s1 here. And I'm going to do plus s2. Going to change that to an equal sign. It's going to be 20. Alright, and the third one is going to be x1 plus 2x2. No s1, no s2, just plus s3. And that's going to equal 36. And then the very last thing I need to remind myself is for my z. Alright, I need to subtract my x's over to the other side. Okay, because all the variables have to be on the left-hand side. So my objective function should look like negative x1 minus 3x2. There's no s's in your objective function, it's just plus z, and then you're left with 0 at the very end because you got rid of all of this. And then you're ready to create your tableau. Now be very careful here because you have an x1, you have a column for x1, you have a column for x2, okay, but then the very next thing you're going to see is s1, and then s2, and then s3 here. Don't forget that z is a variable, and then you have your vertical line, and then you're going to have your constants on the other side. Alright, and you're going to close up that matrix, and you're going to write everything in here. So we have 1x1, 1x2, 1s1. There's no s2 and 3 in that first equation. There's no z, and our constant is 10. In the second equation, we have 5x1, 2x2, no S1, but there is one S2, and then 0 for S3, 0 for Z, and a 20 on our constant. Okay? In S3, we have one S1, two S2, and then we have a S3, no Z, and that one's going to be 36. And then time for our objective function. So our objective function should be -1, -3, no S's, a Z, and then a 0. And then don't forget to draw your line above your objective function. Alright, and like I said, I'm just going to make a little note to myself that that's my objective function. And you're all done. That's your simplex tableau. The very last thing we're going to talk about today is how to read a solution. Okay, and from reading the solution, we're going to use what's called basic variables. Okay, and that's all your non-zero variables. So, I know that sounds kind of weird, but you remember way back when we were solving matrices and we would get something that looked like this, and you'd have your vertical line, and then there'd be like a 4 and a 3. And remember we said that like this column was X and that column was Y, and then the last column was your constants. And then we could say 1x equals 4. And then we could say 1y equals 3. And then we could say our answer was 4, 3. Okay, this is the same idea. So notice the big thing about these columns is that they only have a number and then all zeros. So like there's only a 1 in the X part, and then there's all zeros. And then there's only a 1 in the Y part, and then there's all zeros. So what you're looking for is you're looking for columns that have a single number and the rest are zeros. So like X2 here, S1 or S2, and then Z. Okay, so those are going to be our 3 basic variables. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those and we're going to find them. So like this is 1, X2, and then it equals the one at the end of its row. So it's going to equal 4. So basically X2 is 4. Okay, we're going to do the same for S2. This is 1 S2, and it's going to equal what's at the end of its row. So we got 1 S2 equals 8. So S2 is 8. And then that very last one says that 1Z, and it's going to equal the end of its row, which is 28. So if I would divide by 1, it just tells me Z is 28. Now, when you go to say your solution, because that's what it wants you to do, is to read the solution, all the other variables that are listed up there, so we have X1, X3, and S1, those are all 0 because we couldn't read a solution for it. And you're going to put it in order. So X1 is 0. X2 is 4 from what we just found. Okay, the next variable is X3. We didn't find an answer for that one, so that one's 0. And then same thing with S1. That one's 0, so we didn't find an answer for it. We found that S2 was 1. And then we found that Z is 28. And we're not actually going to write it with a comma. We're going to say with Z equaling 28. And then this would be your solution. Okay, and it's going to work that way every time they ask you to find the solution. You're going to look for the columns that have just one number and the rest are zeros. And then you're going to say this is X3. So this one's actually different because it's 2X3. And 2x3 is equal to 16, because that's at the end of its row. And you would divide here by 2, and it tells you that x3 actually equals 8. So you got to be a little careful with that one. This one says 1s2 is 6, so s2 equals 6. All right, that one was pretty easy. The next one is 5s3 is equal to 35. So 5x3 equals 35. Once again, same idea, you got to get x3 by itself, so x3 is actually 7. Alright, and then you have 3z equals 36. Divide by that 3. And z equals 12. And then you just got to write your final solution. Remember, all the ones that we didn't solve for are all 0. So x1 is 0, and x2 is 0, and then x3 is 8, and s1 is 0, and s2 is 6, and I'm sorry, way up here, this should have said s3, not x. And then s3 is 7. And then when you get to z, you're always going to say with, because that's what you're trying to maximize here, z equal to 12. And then this would be your final solution. Alright, good luck. The homework, I'll write it up here at the top for you. Homework is page 175, number 2 through 12 even, and then 20, 22, and 24.